What's happening, everybody? Afternoon. Apologies for keeping you guys waiting a couple minutes there. Hopefully you caught my note in Slack. I got a little caught up looking at some splits for tonight's matchup and writing my MLB column there, so a little bit behind, but getting fired up. Got into some technical difficulties getting the show set up when my windows weren't appearing right, so fun stuff, but figuring we're taking a look at baseball again. We have a 5-game main slate lined up for tonight, so I whittled this back down to hopefully just a view of the actual main slate in my model here. And we should have Fantasy Cruncher up and running in the background in this other window. Right, so we'll go through some of Fantasy Cruncher. People keep asking, I know if we've kind of done this a couple times on the Saturday show, but people keep asking to go through the process of building and selecting these lineups. How do we go through stacks? How do we create stacks? So I'll take you through the sorting tool again. We'll take a quick look at that. We can take a quick look at how the naming conventions tool work, because there is some importance to that if you're building out that sorting table, and that's something that people have asked about, how to correct for some of those naming issues. So we'll go through some of that stuff. We'll see if Fantasy Cruncher will let me reload this page now, since we're now running it with the production studio up. Hopefully it will. We'll come back to that in a moment. So just taking a quick overview of the slate. If you've seen my MLB article that went up a few minutes before we went live, I've kind of started to really dig the Dean Kramer play here against this Texas Rangers lineup. He only cost $6,500 on FanDuel. He's $6,000 on DK. It makes sense totally as a DK play at $6,000 as your SP2. But I'm kind of psyched to use him here as an SP1 on FanDuel. He's ranked out third on the top pitchers tool. If you guys take a look at the top pitchers, which we can pull up in just a sec, he ranks out third in that tool, and he's going a little under-owned for where we've got him, at least as of the last time I took a look. So we'll pull that up and see if that's holding true for the FanDuel slate. I think he's getting more level ownership in terms of his probability of being a top 2 on DK, just because of that cheapo price and some of the other options. The slate kind of sucks for pitching. So let's see when this pops up. Yeah, so you can see we've got him third. On the DK side of things, he's a 21% probability of being the top 2, but he's getting owned to a 29% share. That's not like egregious, particularly when we're talking about a second starter, but it is a little higher than we'd like to see in comparison to his probability of being a top pitcher. But on the FanDuel side, he was going a little under, and that's still holding true. 10% probability to be the top pitcher and only a 7% ownership share. So I like him a little bit better than a lot of these other options. Like I talked about Greinke, who I think is, I don't want to use the washed up words because he keeps proving me wrong that he's not washed up. He's able to do it, but like his pitching arsenal is washed up. He is certainly not the same guy that he was. He's making it work. Ooh, seeing that trickle off my mustache? So he's making it work, but I just don't know that we're going to get that caliber of a start from him, and it's just kind of unpredictable at this point. So I'm not crazy comfortable, and you can see Kramer's ranking out better, and you're getting a negatively leveraged Zach Greinke in that spot. So I don't love that. Definitely don't like Quintana, even though we're ranking him out fourth, even though he's got this positive leverage. This will lead me to him, I think, in some shares because he's also extremely affordable. But I just hate the matchup against the Twins. I wrote up that Twins stack. They're getting a ton of popularity, but it's not, baseball doesn't necessarily work. We'll hit that one sec, Toronto. Baseball doesn't necessarily work in that way where like this stack is going to be highly owned, so let me throw the pitcher at them. It works kind of the other way where if you've got a high owned pitcher, maybe it makes some sense to throw some bats. Not necessarily the case the other way around with pitchers. So I'm not getting a great number on Quintana. I don't love the spot against the Minnesota bats, and I kind of wrote them up, even though, let's see where I've got Quintana. It was a respectable number. It wasn't terrible. Yeah, 25-8, which on this slate ranks out right with most of the other guys. I think he's going to come in under this. Like this is model love for him more than what my own personal thoughts on it are saying, which I don't like to do, but I'm willing to get into a little bit more in baseball, particularly early in the season. I just think Quintana is pretty washed at this point, but we'll see. He has had a nice little strikeout rate so far early on, and it held up through his 10 innings last year, but we're talking about 15 innings over 2 years. He's a 20.4% strikeout guy with a 139 whip. He holds up to a 3.80 FIP in that 2019 sample, but I think he's just more serviceable MLB pitcher, particularly at this point in his career, than he is fantasy option. So I don't totally buy my projection here, nor our ranking of him. Willing to be proven wrong, though, and will have some with the positive leverage. Dane Dunning, I do like on the other side of that Orioles matchup, particularly given the fact that we're getting him at essentially half where he should be owned on the FanDuel slate. The Baltimore lineup is better, I think, and better at not striking out than the Texas lineup is, which we started this talking about Dean Kremer, and we'll circle back. I just wanted to go through the other thoughts here. Dunning would kind of be the bottom of where I want to go. I'll have some Shoemaker, but I don't love the matchup against the Angels. I don't think I'll have much Cahill. I don't think I'll have much of any Anderson or Flexen. So really it kind of stops with Dunning here for me in terms of anybody I'm really considering bigger shares on. So I'll play that leverage, but I like the matchup better for Dean Kremer. If we go back to the screen we're on to start with, what appeals to me on Dean Kremer, and I realize that I'm not showing this window. We just went back to the matchup here. What appeals to me about Dean Kremer, and I mentioned this in the column, outside of Kiner-Falefa, you got a ton of projected strikeouts. This is Steamer's season-long strikeout projection. You have just a massive amount of strikeouts here. It was an average, including Kiner-Falefa's 17%, which is very good. It was still an average of 26% down the lineup. Kremer is a kid who has been a high 20s to mid 30s strikeout rate pitcher through his minor league career. Put up a 26.5 strikeout rate in 18 innings across 4 starts last year at the major league level. Yeah, he walked 14% of hitters, which is 14.5, which is concerning, and is at 15% in his 6-inning sample this year. This could definitely go pop, and there are a couple of bats in that Texas lineup to fear in Joey Gallo. This kid Adolis Garcia, who is kind of fleshed to extreme power upside. A ton of strikeouts there, though. It's very questionable. 2 holes in the middle of that lineup for the Rangers here, and maybe David Dahl. So I'm not stacking Rangers too much. You know, I'll maybe take some, but you can see the public is very much on the Rangers, which concerns me. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily work that I want to throw a pitcher who's not getting that much ownership against a high-owned stack. It's just kind of working out that way with a pitcher who turns out to be someone who is projecting well for me. I just think there's a lot of strikeouts here for him. If he can harness the walks a little bit, I like what it can do, and at that salary, it makes it, it opens up every bat that you want, basically. You can stack pretty much anything. So I'm going to have an uncomfortable amount of Dean Kremer tonight, it appears, at least at this point. So that's kind of where my pitching thoughts came down. In terms of the bats, I mentioned I really like the Twins, but we can see they're getting a lot of ownership. Like, these are uncomfortable ownership numbers for these guys. We don't have probably Kyle Garlick or Luis Arias projected for much ownership right now in the middle of this lineup. This is the Shmanashi Schmabs projected lineup here. I don't agree with this projected lineup necessarily, but it's the one I'm using. I don't think they're going to play both Kepler and Jake Cave in a lefty-lefty. That just doesn't make sense, even if they're doing it in the 8 and 9 spot. Those guys are both bad in that split, and you just don't want to bake that into your lineup. Not really considering many shares of either one, if whichever one does trickle in. But 1 through 7, I do like this lineup. I hope that these ownership projections we're seeing here, if these two are hitting in the middle of the lineup, Kyle Garlick and Luis Arias, there's a lot to like there. Garlick has some upside for power. Arias has an amazing hit tool and an ability to get on base and just not strike out like at all. You see his absurd 9% season-long projected strikeout rate from Steamer. That's not totally crazy. Last season, he was a 321, 364, 402 triple slash. You can see the lack of power here. No home runs in his 121 plate appearances, 4 home runs the year before in his 366. But he's getting on a ton, nearly 400 on base percentage year before, 334 average. So there's just a lot to like in his hit tool and low ownership if that holds. And then you get to Sano and Polanco down here at pretty low ownership on, at least on DK. Polanco low ownership on FanDuel. Sano getting some, but probably not enough for his price and his ridiculous upside. So I think you can get to the Twins and make it different enough that it's playable. And then if you're getting some leverage with your pitcher, a guy like Kramer, or going to Dane Dunning on the other side of that Orioles matchup, I think there's enough room, even on a 5-game slate, where you can build out a full stack of the Twins and still get to something unique. Just, don't do it and then put Mike Trout in as your one-off at 40% ownership on FanDuel, 23%. Probably don't use Ohtani there either on the other side of this game. I like those guys as plays, and I like the Angels stack going up against Shoemaker here. I think there's plenty of upside there. You can see my home run model. That's the column here in the middle. Does like it quite a bit as well. They're actually projecting better than the Twins are for homers, which is interesting. So I'll have definitely some Angels based on that. And then I think I'm going to get to some of these Astros. I like the ownership right here on Brantley and Gurriel. Seems like the public's getting to more of Tucker and Correa, a little bit of Aledmys Diaz. If Straw is leading off at that ownership, I'll definitely take out some shares at 2,400. Just a kid who, if he's going to be on base, he's going to be flying around the bases. And all these guys who we're thinking might be driving in some runs against Chris Flexen, well, he's the guy that they're probably going to be driving in. So it makes sense to add him to your stacks. On the other side, I mentioned Zach Greinke. I don't love and trust at this point, but I don't know how much of the Mariners I want to go to against him because, like I said, he is kind of getting by on Guile. That'll be an interesting little exercise, actually. Let's take a look at what Zach Greinke is doing. People ask about this a lot, so maybe this will be an interesting look for some folks. Let's take a look at Mr. Greinke. I want to see what his hard contact numbers look like. It's EN. I always forget that. When I say always, I mean like every time I type this guy's name, and I type it pretty frequently. You'd think I would know that it was EI at this point. So some of the stuff that we look at, this site, Fangraphs, is fantastic for baseball stats. Typically, like if you're not a baseball head, if you're not somebody who knows what you're looking for, looking at in stats, a lot of people ask us these questions and like, what should I be looking at? The answer is really our projections, our top stacks tool, our top starters tool, and things like that. Like we take most of this work out of the equation for you guys. Somebody did ask a question in here, and I just wanted to see if I can find it. But I think it maybe is interesting for some folks who do get into this stuff to take a look at. Although it's not loading, and if this is going to be our loading speed, all right. I'm just going to scroll down. All right. Love his hard hit right here. So you can see it's just got his whole career laid out. Obviously the people at Fangraphs do an amazing job. They operate on donations. So what I was kind of going to get to was if you have extra money from some of your DFS winnings to spend and you've already subscribed to the top platinum subscription at awesemo.com, which you probably have since you're behind the paywall here, consider throwing a couple bucks Fangraphs away because they do a killer job. And most of my stuff runs on this, and they killed me when they changed this column to team abbreviations this year. But, anyway, what I like about what Greinke does is he's limiting hard contact right now, 27.6% rate. You can see the year that he went a little wonky and a little bad, he was giving up some, and he kind of tempered that, brought it back in. Some soft contact, but he puts a lot of it into medium, so he still allows guys to drive the ball a little bit there. The barrels, which is kind of event-based, not allowing too many so far this season, but they were up a little bit last year. It was a little concerning. And I want to see the called to swinging strike rate because I imagine this is going to be highly called. Yeah. Right, so this column is the called plus swinging strike rate, which is down. His strikes are down overall, at 27%. His called is down, but mostly driving everything that he's getting strikes wise. So when I say he's getting by with guile, he is getting by with guile. He is nibbling. He's making guys guess and guess wrong, but the stuff is not there. 7.8% swinging strike rate. You can see that's down, way down from his 10%. Again, small sample size alert here. I expect it'll regress back toward that 10% mark, but if that's down in the nines, I wouldn't be surprised at all, given the trend that you can see, kind of laid out there. So, just some of the concerning stuff with Greinke there. And then we can hop over to the StatCast numbers and take a look at some of this. These guys do an amazing job as well. So this is where I'm getting a lot of the percentile stuff. I could have just come here and talked on the hard hit numbers and everything, but I did want to check that call plus swinging strike rate. This loads it up graphically pretty nicely. Again, just killing me on the speed though, which is annoying. So I like to go down here and take a look at the pitch tracking, where you can see some of the stuff that I bring up on the shows in terms of where guys are getting their swing and miss, the velocity at which they're throwing some of these pitches. Now we're just completely frozen. This is maybe a bad, yeah. All this shit needed a little load. All right. My scrolling back and forth while that was frozen didn't help us. So like I was saying, this is where you're getting some of that pitch data from. I talk about spin rate a lot. You can see he's still pretty effective spin rate on his stuff, which helps him. But it's declined a little bit on the fastball. Breaking stuff is basically still right where it was in terms of the spin rate. Then the percent at which he throws the pitches. And you can see the decline that we talked about if we open more seasons in his fastball. Right, average fastball velo was in the low 90s, declines to 89, declines to right around 90, 88.1 last year, 88.4 this year. But what we're concerned with is how that compares to his changeup, which hasn't really changed that much. Used to be a nice differential there, and it's really, the gap is closed. So it makes that a less effective pitch. He's relying on some of these pitches a little bit more. As you can see, he's increased the rate at which he's throwing some of those pitches. Changing pitcher, worsening arsenal concerns me about Mr. Greinke. We're spending a little bit of time on Zach Greinke here, and I'm not sure why. We got kind of into the weeds there. But some people ask, like I said, some of the things that we like to look at. So I would throw some Mariners bats up against that, and the public doesn't seem to be going there in the outside of the top 3 hitters, who are my highest projected hitters for them here. And I think that makes sense, but I have no problems with stacking in, particularly like a Taylor Trammell, a Dylan Moore. I think both of those kids have a lot of utility and a lot of upside for DFS purposes for us. If you wanted to even use like a J.P. Crawford who flashes power and speed every now and again as a wraparound option, cheapo shortstop, I don't mind that at all. I'm not talking about rolling out 150 Mariners lineups here, but I think you can get away with some stacks. And then the last one to kind of talk through and focus on, and I did this in the column as well if you guys just would rather read the version of this. We also talked it through on the strategy show, but I think it's just super important for this slate. You guys can see my projections are not Kershaw and Darvish-like. They kind of rank out right in line with the other pitchers in terms of where my projections are. I'm going to give both of these guys the benefit of the doubt and give them a little nudge in Fantasy Cruncher when I crunch lineups for real later on. I think they're more likely to put up a bigger upside game. It looks like Alex's tools are kind of agreeing with that. And I want to create a little bit of separation for them from, the Matt Shoemakers and whatnot of the world. But that's all about the matchup. And I think I closed the other Excel file I did. Can I get back to that easily? Let me see if I can show this to you guys easily enough. Oh, damn it. Forgot to change the window. It doesn't matter because I wasn't really talking through the stats yet, but this is what I just clicked to over here. Probably not going to be able to load this team stack. All right, maybe. Let me see if I can give us another video window here real quick. What I'm trying to load up is the team splits. And this is something I talk about on the various shows that we do as well. This is going to be really big for a moment. I just slapped this together for easy reference for columns and such. And it's 4 of the stats that I like to talk about when I talk team stats and what they've done. This is when I say back to the start of 2019 against right-handed pitchers or whatever. This is what I'm talking about. And what it is our team splits and how they rank. Right? So we were talking about the Dodgers. They're going up against Yu Darvish. Right? And like I said, Yu is a spectacular righty. You had a 31.3% strikeout rate last year, a 31.3% strikeout rate the year before. He's at 27.5 so far this year, only 17 innings. I expect him to be in that high 20s to 30s, no doubt about it, through the year. But if we're looking at this is the active roster for the Dodgers going back to the start of 2019. So we're talking about a good sample size here, and we're talking about the guys on the team. We can see league-leading ISO against the right-handed pitchers by a pretty good margin. Right? So ISO is our isolated power metric, looking at extra base hits and taking all the slap hits and everything out of it. They have a second in the league, second best strikeout rate at only 19.8% team strikeout rate against right-handed pitching. Their WRC plus is team leading. WRC plus is the rate at which they create runs as compares to the league average. So 100 is exactly league average. This is a better stat to use for individuals, but it gives you an idea of the frequency with which teams create runs and score runs as a team as well. So it's handy for just kind of a reference of how they do in the split in general, even if we're not considering power, just in terms of runs. So it's kind of handy to evaluate stacks and pitcher matchups against a team's potential for upside. So like I said, 100 is average. So when I say a team is 28% better at creating runs, they've got a 128 WRC plus. Home runs, I think this was 5th, 246. So they're a spectacular offense in the split against right-handed pitching. On the other side of things, Kershaw's got it a little bit easier, but not like a lot. That Padres lineup, they're more league average-esque in terms of they're 11th with a 193, and you see that doesn't spread too far from like the 15th ranked league average teams. They were a decent strikeout rate, but around league average. Yeah, 22.3. That's around league average. Not too much spread trending downward. Not too much spread trending toward the middle here, or the top 10 here. So that's fine. Good WRC plus, so they scratch out runs more than they hit for power against lefties. Which, maybe Kershaw's putting a couple guys on base tonight. They might drive in some runs. But you can see somewhat limited home run production and power upside. Now, we've got some great bats in this lineup, guys that we love to stack. But that kind of tells me that I'm a little worried about the Kershaw matchup for Kershaw in terms of their ability to produce runs, even if they don't take him deep. But I'm also a little bit, trepidatious about going overboard on stacking Padres here against Kershaw, even if you're thinking of it in terms of, hey, maybe that's a good contrarian stack with some bats that I really like, Fernando Tatis. You do get these guys, your Jake Cronenworth, your Trent Grisham's lefty-lefty, your Eric Hosmers of the world lefty-lefty at pretty low ownership, which is interesting. Manny Machado, sure, decently low ownership. But I worry about the power upside and the DFS production upside for that Padres lineup. And then I'm kind of concerned about Yu Darvish going up against this Dodgers lineup. So maybe if we're looking to get contrarian, it's more about paying up for the Dodgers. Now, the Dodgers, on the other hand, though, are somewhat cheap for who they are on FanDuel and are drawing a little bit of ownership, which is kind of annoying. So it's a really weird spot. I think it's going to be a really fun baseball game to watch. I'm going to have it on. I just don't know how much of it I'm going to totally end up landing on DFS-wise. I know I'm talking over some stuff that I already covered on the strategy show, but I like to get in and kind of like dig into what I'm going to do with this and how I look at these things as we talk through it on these shows. The last game that I didn't actually do that for is the ugly Trevor Cahill versus Brett Anderson matchup. You can see Anderson, for some reason, is projecting here. I don't buy that projection at all, and I am going to get in there and probably cut it down. Let's see where he was in the top starters. And this is what I do when I have something that looks wrong to me in my model. I go and I see what Alex is doing, and it looks like my opinion is probably right and my model is probably incorrect. So there might be some old wonky data in here for Brett Anderson. I'm not really sure what's creating that. Maybe the lefties and some strikeout numbers. Although the Pirates are pretty good at limiting strikeouts. Not really sure where that projection's coming from, but I don't buy it, and it doesn't look like it jives with our top starters. So people ask how I use the top stacks, how I use the top starters, and use that to make some decisions. That's a manual-ish process for me, where I'll look for things specifically like that. And I do that both in terms of looking at my model here and what I'm seeing in my projections, and then when I actually get into Fantasy Cruncher, we'll let that refresh later. When I actually get into Fantasy Cruncher here, that's how I kind of go about what I want to do with not only my pitcher projections, but my pitcher exposures, which I typically will set manually. And the way I do that, we've got randomness off right now, but no worries. The way I typically do that is I straight up come in here, I set everybody to 0. I haven't uploaded my projections in, so we're just looking at Alex's here, which is actually probably better for this purpose since I am talking about not agreeing with my Anderson projection. What's Alex's actual number? 2345. Yeah, that's a weird difference. I wonder where that's coming from. It's not his strikeout rate. It's not the fact that he hasn't pitched, because he has. I don't get it, guys. I really don't know. If Brett Anderson goes off tonight, you heard it here first, but I won't have it. It's a weird one. So what I'll do is I will literally just go back and forth from the top starters, just comparing our probability of them being the top pitcher along with the probability or with the ownership projections, get an idea of the leverage. That's what we call that. And then I'll start applying some of my ownership. Now you can view the ownership right here if you're forgetful like I am for numbers in short-term memory situations. But I talked about I've got a nice aggressive projection on Dean Kramer. I definitely want to get more than the field of him. We saw that he's got around a 10% ownership share or a 7% ownership share. Short-term memory, beep, boop, boop. And a 10% top pitcher probability. So I definitely want to leverage that, and I'll push the Kramer shares. I'm going to go to, particularly on a short slate, we can put him at like a 3x here. Not saying we're going to roster him at 21%, but I'm definitely willing to let him get into a good swath of these lineups as we crunch like 500 lineups out. Dane Dunning was the other guy I said I had pretty nicely leveraged. I like the potential for upside there. Unfortunately, they're on the opposite sides of the same game, so they're going to be competing for that win. I would be surprised if both of them put up a good start. It's probably more likely that Dane Dunning is going to put up a better start, even though I have the other guy projected higher. Dunning's probably the better pitcher at this point in his career, although he's in a worse matchup. Regardless, let's let 4x worth of Dunning triple in, which is only, I'm sorry, that's actually like 3x. Let's let 4x worth trickle in, and get into our crunches here. Cahill, I don't really want much of. Nice value grade, but don't love the projection. My projection was worse. But on a short slate, we're going to need to allow at least for around the field, which is what I'll do here, And then we get our decision points on these guys. I'll swing back to these guys. Let me just set the rest of them. I could be around the field on Quintana. I can be around the fields. Actually, I'll allow for... She was only going like 1% owned in this projection. Same with Flexen. So we'll just allow those guys to go to 5x, even though that's 5%. And then our pal Zach Greinke here. By virtue of the matchup... Negative. Do I even want to do what I was about to say I was going to do? I don't think I do. I think I'm going to go... I'll let it get to around the field, and if I end up under, I'm happy. Make that the field. So we're going to need to definitely leave some room on these guys, obviously, because we're pretty limited on where we're going to allow our pitcher distributions. These guys are going to be super chalky. They are the top of the board, right? We've seen the top of the pitcher's tool a few times here already. Top of the board, both sites, firmly top of the board. A lot of ownership going to them, though, and like I said, they are in tough matchups against one another. So, it's dicey about, do I want to get to a lot more than the field of these guys? Do I want to let that happen with one of them? It's tricky. The points grade is there. So I'm going to put them both in the 30% range and kind of see how that comes out in crunches. I suspect that we'll get them both around that. Been giving heavier randomness to starters this last week and change. That's probably aggressive, but it's a 5-game slate, and I want to create some shakeup on this, relatively flat outside of those two guys slate. If I had my... Should I drop my projections in? That'll screw up our... All right. I want to run this with mine just because it's got a flatter projection for Kershaw and Darvish. Bear with me half a second. I'm just going to drop my pitcher projections in. Hopefully this will do this quickly enough. So just drop my pitcher projections in. Like I said, I think it'll just give kind of a more interesting result in terms of where Greinke and Darvish are ranked, as well as Dean Kramer, who's going to explode through the roof. I'm going to actually change the Brett Anderson projection to Alex's for our purposes here, though. I don't know why we got $6,000 exposure. That's weird. And then Brett Anderson. Change that. Sometimes I'll do that too, which is handy in Fantasy Cruncher. If you do use your own projections, you can always just default to Alex as well, just by clicking it back that way. So we're going to get an absolute boatload of Dean Kramer here as soon as I put his exposure level back. Given that he's at a 33-point projection at a 6,500 salary, maybe it makes more sense for this purpose. For this purpose, let's use Alex's more reasonable 28-point projection, which puts him kind of like right in line where I've got everybody else projected. This should give us a pretty broad spread of pitchers now. Let's see if we can get 100 lineups out of Fantasy Cruncher. Let's see if I can punch over to the premium Slack here, see what you guys are up to. I haven't seen questions pop up, but if you got them, feel free to ask them. I'm just kind of doing this while we're waiting on some lineups here. Oh, damn it. And it would probably be helpful to tell it to actually build stacks for us, because that's the kind of lineups we want to be building, and to use uniques. A lot of steps, guys. I didn't look at what I want to do here. Let me just let these go onto about that. Clone that. I'm going to set the second one for 3s, so we have a little bit of flexibility here. And I think it makes some sense on a short slate. Grab a little bit of variance. Go to 12. For the 3s, I'll go to 1. For the 4s, I'll go to 2. Let everybody fly at the same exposures. And then we'll force 3 uniques. And we also should set some general player caps on the hitters. I'm just going to drop a boatload of randomness on these hitters real quick and set some exposure caps, assuming we didn't freeze. So if my model didn't do a lot of this stuff for me and give me specific projections for these guys, I would just be coming in here and doing it this way, if it would let me. Come on, I've clicked on it 3 times. I typically want more on some of the big end hitters, but this is fine for our purposes right now. Just want to get some lineups built, damn it. And then Alex has talked about how he sets his custom ownership in terms of using our ownership pool. I'm going to do it the down and dirty way and just cut everybody down to like 25%. Sometimes I get lost between my habit of clicking on things too much and then this not opening and waiting for another click for me. It appears that we're at an impasse right now. All right, I'm going to have to get a better computer than this if to run this thing if I'm going to do this from now on. This is just bugging me. Hey, thanks. 22%. I don't even want to go to a quarter. Let's just grab a big old swath of this 5 gamer on this crunch if it actually runs. And it is slowly starting to run, I think. All right. We're probably missing a few confirmed lineups in there. Looks like the Rangers lineup got confirmed. Let's see who's in it. Brock Holt. Lead off Brock Holt. No relation to Steve. Nate Lowe, Joey Gallo, Adolis Garcia, David Dahl, Nick Solak. Ooh, Willie Calhoun back in the lineup. Look at him. Willie Calhoun is a high-end prospect who has an amazing hit tool according to scouts, and has struggled so far at the major league level to really come through with it outside of his initial debut and first couple hundred plate appearances. Was really down last year, down so far this year. 2.1K on, I think I'm on FanDuel. Yeah, on FanDuel. 2,100 on FanDuel toward the bottom of the lineup, but I think that's kind of interesting, especially if people aren't going to work him in. I still trust the overall quality of the hit tool. 2,500 on DK. Hitting 7th. I mean, it's not the greatest lineup spot in the world, but I think it's fine. Another lefty going up against our pal Dean Kramer here. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of the top 7 hitters hitting from the left side of the plate. The cleanup hitter is Adolis Garcia, who everybody's in love with right now. And then Nick Solak in the 6th spot there. That Texas lineup is a little frisky, but like I said, the top end was getting some ownership. I'll be curious to see where the ownership shakes out now that we've got a little bit of a different lineup now. Going to be interesting on where the strikeouts project as well for Dean Kramer. Quick look there. I think you guys are still just watching lineup, hopefully crunching. Let me click back to that and see if any have actually been produced. Look at us go. 22. Flying along. Jackie Bradley Jr. currently the top owned. There we go. That's a little more like it. Nelson Cruz. Dean Kramer hitting that 24% cap. Getting a lot of Twins. I mentioned liking the power marks for the Angels on the other side of that one. So we're getting a lot of Angels, getting some Astros, which I expected. A little Mitch Haniger. I get a nice mark on Haniger a lot of the time. A little Brian Reynolds over here. Reynolds was my home run pick from the Pirates today. Getting a nice little projection for pop on him. So we'll let those run just a little minute longer. And then we'll take a look at trying to get some of them sorted real quick. Just make sure I can do that. Make sure I've cleared out. Just work in the background here while those crunch real quick. I'm just going to make sure we've got the line review tab sorted, cleared off. And it looks like we do. Hopefully there's a name in here that I need to update so that we can do the naming thing in real time. I think we're going to work with 45 lineups because we'll be here for the rest of the show if we just let this run. 46 lineups. Excuse me. Fantasy Cruncher want to squeeze one more in. Whatever. You guys like me where it's like, all right, we got that 46 lineup, so now that has to be a part of my pool of entries no matter what. Like otherwise, of course that would be the one that Fantasy Cruncher gave us to have the winning lineup. I don't actually believe these things, but like my brain, conjures them. And then sometimes I act on them because I'm stupid. There we go. Right, so you guys have seen this one. I've done these before, but to go through it again. And this is a simple version. I had a big, messy version of this, and last year I didn't like my lineup selections through a lot of last year. It cost me some money. Didn't like my end of the season results last year. I was better in the beginning part of the season. So I just kind of rebuilt this along Alex's lines and just simplified everything that I was doing. So people were asking about what I'm doing in terms of lineup selection. For the rankings, I am literally just using a 1.75x on projection and a straight line percentile ranking for ownership and projection rank right now. And that's all I'm doing. You can see that right there. Can you see that? Nope. You can see that right there. So this is the sorting table. Close you. No. And see if we can gain back a little bit of processing horsepower here. Closing you. I don't care about saving that. Right, so like I was saying, it's a simple 175X. I can change this on the fly if I'm not getting the right lineups, and by right lineups, I'm kind of looking at the top stacks tool, eyeballing what I'm getting in the distributions over here. I know these players' names, and I know just which teams they play on, so for me, it's easy enough to just identify which stacks these are by doing it that way. I do need to build out a better sorting process over here. Some people have had some great ideas and some great looking tools that they've built in our Slack channels. I'm going to go into my my basketball model and basically rip off everything that I'm doing from over there in terms of tracking the player projections or the player exposures and everything, and then just adapt it for stacks and all. But that's a project. That's a work in progress. So I took you guys through what this tool does in terms of this formula here. Just strips the player number off. You get the player result. And then we're running the tab here. Oh, and that's the other thing what I was doing with the projection. I forgot about that. This is running right now a projection for the hitters only and leaving out the pitchers. What I was doing previous to that, I was running a projection average for the hitters only. Looking for highly ranked stacks, it was kind of my idea behind doing that. I'm still not totally sure where I'm going to land in the wash, but I think I want to go back to just including the pitchers. The reason I had taken them out was because it was becoming difficult on a day like where you would have a highly stratified guy like, let's say, Glasnow on the early slate today, where he was just way high and above the other pitchers. Using so much projection was making this a little wonky and returning like 150 Glasnow lineups off the top, and that's not what I wanted to enter. So it was just, I'm playing with ways to get different results from that, and taking the pitchers off, I think, kind of worked in that regard. But for right now, I'm putting the pitcher back in. I'm just using a straight line sum, and we'll just do it the old-fashioned way. Right? All right, good. So we've got some NAs over here. So what this is referring to, this is the ownership. It's doing the same thing. We're just doing an old-fashioned VLOOKUP of each guy's name, pulling their projection from my model, and then over here pulling the ownership projection. These guys are coming up as NAs because they are not projected for ownership. Because Byron Buxton, the reason we have Byron Buxton in here, despite the fact that he's not going to play, is because I ran it without taking a bunch of people out of the out of Fantasy Cruncher in their new little wrinkle that you have to manually take guys who aren't going to be in the lineup out. Although I don't think the Twins have confirmed that lineup. Buxton will not be likely to play. Because I believe he's hurt. That said, the reason we're seeing the NA there, and it's a good example for our... Actually, it's not. Because he's not spelled properly. He's not misspelled. He's just missing. All right, so that's not a great example. Never mind. Scratch what I said there. Let me find somebody who is a good example. Maybe we don't have one. Yeah, a lot of these guys are just not popping because they're... It's not because they're improperly named, it's just because they're not in the ownership projections, which would be not what I wanted to show. So what I will show instead is let's pretend like, right? What this is doing is grabbing that Colin Moran. So I guess Colin Moran is not in our ownership projections. But let's say that he was Colin Moran Jr. in some places, right? And that was why we weren't getting our return over there. All you need to do for that is build a naming convention, a naming table. And this is yet another naming table in this model of many naming tables. The way to do it is you put so let's say Colin Moran is, let's say he was coming up as Colin Moran out of Fantasy Cruncher, and you can see the differences across some of these, right? So like Lourdes Gurriel comes up as Lourdes Gurriel from Fantasy Cruncher, but in FanDuel, he's Lourdes Gurriel Jr., and in Awesimo's ownership, and most of what we do, he is Lourdes Gurriel Jr. Same thing with Ronald Acuna, Joshua to Josh, Nick to Nicholas, Enrique to Kike. I wish everybody would do it as Enrique, given that this is a slur for a lot of people. Pete to Peter Alonso, etc., etc. This gets really annoying when it happens, but this is the way to fix it. on the fly. So you just need to drop the first name here, and then each different name that you want to give it the possibility to correct to. So I haven't needed to use any in this new little line review space here for graphs or labs, because we're not pulling from them for this space right now. But we are pulling from these two spots. So you give it the correction. Let's say it was Colin. Actually, I don't even really need to lay it out. I can, Colin Moran Jr., right? Let's say that was his name there. And then Awesemo. Right, so now we've got our table. It's not going to move it right. Such a pain. Now we've got our table laid out. And the way that the formula was written over here is if error, right? So what if error does is it tells it if it returns this NA with a naming convention error, most likely. The first lookup, so we're looking up what if error says is if there's an error, right? So the value, the initial value with no error is the first lookup, right? So for everybody else over here, it's returning the ownership number because it's finding them. When it doesn't find Colin Moran, it's told then, all right, look up the lookup that you're finding. So go look him up, look up Colin Moran against this naming convention table that we've created. So look up Colin Moran in new name, Colin Moran in new names between that space and that space, and then return the third value because we wanted Awesemo's ownership value. If you remember those columns, I'm not going to click over because it'll screw up the formula. If you remember those columns, Awesemo's was the third one. So now it's telling it to grab that third name, that return result, and then look that up in what was our original lookup. And it would return the value for Lourdes Gurriel Jr. instead, and then you get your full projection line. That's how you build a down and dirty naming convention table. There are cleaner ways than VLOOKUP to do things in Excel these days for index match, for XLOOKUP. Index match, I find I have to think through too much. I kind of just grew up with VLOOKUP, so I can do this off the top of my head on the fly without thinking about it. Where index match, I still need to think. So this is just faster, even though VLOOKUP is imperfect and clunkier, and you have to do things like repeating columns sometimes to do a multi-lookup and all sorts of gymnastics. So if you're doing it from scratch, look into like XLOOKUP or index matching these. But this is a down and dirty way to build your lineup there. The reason we're not getting full results over here and we're not actually able to sort is because we have an incomplete list of lineups and a bunch of missing names. Ideally, these would populate. You would see them ranked as a percentile ranking here. And that's why we're doing the divided by 500. We're doing divided by the total count. This is built to handle 500 lineups. You can extend that to 1,000 by just changing this to 1,000 and putting 1,000 lineups in there. Easy enough. So it's getting the rank, and then it's doing it on a percentile basis. Same thing for the ownership, and then it's putting them together. Like I said, 175x the projection plus the ownership, and it's doing that with the decimal values of what we're getting for the projection, the percentile rankings, and putting that together so it would come out to like a 2.25 or a 1.65 and all. You sort that, you would see that we have lineups that are highly projected, and then middle ranked ownership type lineups, trying to get some of those differentiated lineups while still playing the aggressive projections. Usually before I move things over from Fantasy Cruncher, I'll cull like the top X percent just based on how I'm feeling, totally random, of ownership. Like I'll sort by ownership sum and take the top 30 or so lineups off, rerun some new crunches, maybe a few of them trickle back in, whatever, that's fine, and drop it into here. So I'm kind of culling some of the top ownership, but I'm still forcing through doing some of the sorting based on ownership. And then a lot of the time, this still will get heavily focused. Since we only have 45 lineups in here, it's probably not that crazy right now. Yeah, this is a pretty good spread because we were forcing a pretty good spread through. But let's say like all of these suddenly had Carlos Correa at shortstop through the top 50 lineups here. All right, I might start manually getting in here, and you can just use the filters. And all right, show me the versions without Carlos Correa. And now we get these lineups. So then I could just let me grab my top 15 non-Correa lineups in here. And you can kind of dance through this manually. You're still ranked, so you're still grabbing your best ranked versions. That happens more with pitchers, where I'm like, all right, let me get my top ranked, let me get Dean Kremer out of here. And just show me the top ranked lineups without Dean Kremer so that I can make sure that I'm at least building safety into the absurd amount of Dean Kremer that I'm probably going to end up owning today by grabbing the top end lineups that do not include him. Right? So hopefully some of that makes some sense on how we're going through the sorting process. I kind of talked through the slate. I kind of gave you guys some on this. We didn't get too many questions. Again, I'm going to give you guys some homework to bring me some damn questions next time. What's up, Josh? Yes, cock cake, I'm guessing that's pronounced, which is interesting, but it was QOQ. So, and we're behind the paywall, so I can say whatever the hell I want. How do you use the top stacks tool when determining the team stack exposures? Brian Walsh asked. It's much the same, Brian. So once I get it to this point, I'm kind of looking at that, but I'm kind of doing it in FC as well before I move things over. In terms of, I'm looking at the top stacks tool for those probabilities of being our top stack, which I can show you real quick before we hop off. I know we're a couple minutes over, but it started late and nobody else is coming on this channel, so who cares? I do have a basketball column to write, so, and on Basketball Slate to learn about, quite frankly, before I'm on that show later. But we can look at the top stacks tool real quick. So what I do with that is it's very much the same. We're looking for those highly ranked stacks that are well leveraged. I'll just probably talk this through on DraftKings so that we don't have to wait out another loading screen. I have to find a good solution to raise my monitor by like an inch or two here so that I'm not always looking down at the screen, getting a crick in my neck at the same time. Anyway, this popped up. Right, so I'm looking for these teams that are... I'm showing this, yeah? Hopefully that dude's still in the room. I'm not showing this. Hopefully that dude's still hanging out. So what I'm looking for is teams like what we're getting right off the bat with the Twinkies here. They're our top probability of being a top stack at 15%, with a little bit of a margin over the Astros, but kind of a broad margin over these three teams, and then a nice margin over these guys. More to the point, we got a nice little leverage score on them. They're not the worst value on the board. That would be the Dodgers and the Padres, given their high pricing. They're difficult to get to, and then Alex doesn't have them ranked out well because his model's favoring the pitching in that one, which is interesting. That'll be an interesting little thing to watch during that game. From a DFS analyzing who's giving you better DFS advice perspective, I guess. It's the boss. It's Alex. He's the best in the world at this. That said, it will be just an interesting little point to watch during the night. But other stacks I would go to here, considering the fact that this one to this one is not that big of a difference. It's a little bit more of a difference to the top two. But I would think that Baltimore's interesting here with a 3.6 leverage score. Houston is definitely on the board as the second-ranked team, still a positive leverage score. And all leverage. Brain gets ahead of the mouth sometimes. All leverage is doing is comparing ownership to the probability of being the top stack, right? So you can see that's a simple subtraction that this thing's doing, right? It's subtracting the ownership from the top probability of being the top stack. It's not a complex calculation, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of where the field's going to be in relation to how likely a team is to be your best bet of the night. So you can see that Texas team against my boy Dean Kramer is getting overowned. People are on the other side of that one. I'm going to be on the Kramer side. Let's hope he strikes out a whole bunch of Texas hitters, because that's what your old pal Terry needs. Oh, wait, I'm not your old pal. Emac is. That's what your pal Terry needs to succeed on tonight's slate, I think. Angels, I was getting a nice little power projection on those guys. They're a little negatively leveraged, but this is nothing to fear, particularly in baseball. You can push past the field on them. When you start to get into these teams that are like, I prefer the pitching side in that one, they're negatively leveraged. That's an avoid spot for me. Pirates, not a great lineup, negatively leveraged. You see not a high probability of being the top stack. Like, this just tells me that maybe these two teams are more skippable than others. Like, I would rather have stacks of these teams, which are elite offenses, even against good pitching, than probably Pittsburgh or Seattle teams at negative leverage. I don't know about Milwaukee in this situation, because Milwaukee's got a couple decent bats, a nice little value score here. -3 leverage is concerning, but it might be worth taking a few shares of Milwaukee. Like, I think I'd rather get to Milwaukee at a -3.9 leverage than Texas at only a percentage point better probability at -4 leverage. I just believe a little bit more in that Milwaukee lineup, and they won't be going up against the pitcher that I'm going to be rostering like crazy. I will have a little Texas just to hedge my bet on Dean Kramer, though. That's how we use the top stack tool. Hope that was informative and helpful. We're a little OT here, so I'm going to get out of here rest my voice before the next show, learn about the basketball slate, write about the basketball slate. Guys, check out all the tools and content that you're paying for. You know where to find it if you're using the slate. If you're hearing my voice and you don't know where to find it, that means you're paying for stuff and you don't know how to find it. DM me anytime. I'm around in Slack like 22 of 24 hours every day. Hit me up with questions, whether it's a DM or in our DFS 101 channel. I'm around to help you guys out, and I enjoy doing it. I'm always happy to talk shop. So if you're behind the paywall listening to this but still kind of lost, I'm happy to help you find things, happy to help you learn how to use the tools. DFS 101 channel is great for that. Drop questions in there. Come to these shows with questions in the future. That how to use the Top Stacks tool is a popular and excellent question. Bring things like that. Help me out a little bit with some of the content on this stuff. Otherwise, it's going to be really boring and repetitive, guys. All right. I appreciate the hangout.